Tom Chen adjusted his formal diplomatic uniform one last time as the transport ship descended through the shimmering atmosphere of Zephyria. Through the viewport, he could see the most beautiful planet he had ever laid eyes on. Crystal spires reached toward the purple sky like frozen lightning, and cities of living glass spread across continents that sparkled under the light of 3 distant suns. "Remember, Tom," said Ambassador Rodriguez from the seat beside him, "these people are ancient. Their civilization is older than human recorded history. They communicate through formal rituals that we barely understand. One wrong word could destroy our chances of establishing trade relations." Tom nodded, though he felt his stomach churning with nervous energy. At 28, he was the youngest member of Earth's first contact diplomatic team. He had earned his place through his skill with languages and his ability to learn alien customs quickly. But this mission felt different from all his training simulations. The Zephyrians had been watching humanity for decades before finally making contact 6 months ago. Their first message to Earth had been simple: "Your species shows promise. We wish to meet." Since then, Earth's governments had worked frantically to prepare for this moment. The Zephyrians possessed technology that could solve Earth's energy crisis forever. In return, they wanted something humanity had in abundance: creativity and adaptability. Dr. Sarah Kim, the team's xenobiologist, leaned forward from her seat. "The Queen is young for their species, only about 300 years old. She took the throne recently after her parents died in an accident. The pressure on her must be enormous." 300 years old, Tom muttered. "And I thought my job was stressful." The transport ship landed with a gentle thud on a platform made of what looked like solid starlight. Tom followed his team down the ramp, breathing alien air for the first time. It tasted of copper and flowers, strange but not unpleasant. A group of Zephyrians waited to greet them. Tom had seen pictures, but meeting them in person was completely different. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, with skin that seemed to be made of living crystal that shifted between blue and silver. Their faces were angular and beautiful, with large eyes that held depths like looking into clear water. They wore robes that flowed like liquid light. The lid Zephyrian stepped forward and spoke in a voice like wind chimes. "Welcome, beings of Earth. I am High Counselor Bren. Queen Vera awaits your presence in the Crystal Palace." The journey to the palace took them through streets that defied everything Tom knew about architecture. Buildings grew from the ground like enormous gems, their surfaces reflecting the team's amazed faces back at them. Zephyrian citizens stopped to watch the humans pass, their expressions curious but guarded. "They are beautiful," whispered Dr. Kim. "And terrifying," added Rodriguez. "Remember, they could wipe us out without breaking a sweat if this goes wrong." The Crystal Palace rose before them like a mountain made of pure diamond. Its walls were transparent, showing glimpses of the complex life inside. Tom could see Zephyrians moving through corridors like schools of luminous fish. They were led through halls where the very walls seemed to sing with soft music. Every surface reflected light in ways that made Tom feel dizzy. Finally, they arrived at the throne room, a vast space where the ceiling disappeared into starlight and the floor was made of what looked like frozen aurora. At the center of the room, on a throne carved from a single massive crystal, sat Queen Vera. Tom's breath caught in his throat. He had seen her image in their briefing materials, but nothing had prepared him for seeing her in person. She was smaller than the other Zephyrians, perhaps only 6.5 feet tall, but she radiated a presence that filled the enormous room. Her crystal skin shifted through shades of deep blue and purple, and her eyes held a sadness that seemed older than her years. Around the throne stood 12 members of the High Council, their faces stern and unwelcoming. Tom could feel their suspicion like a physical weight pressing down on him. "Humans of Earth," Queen Vera spoke, her voice carrying easily across the vast space. "You honor us with your presence. I am Vara, Queen of the Zephyrian people." Ambassador Rodriguez stepped forward and began the formal greeting they had practiced hundreds of times. The ceremony took nearly an hour, with each member of both delegations being introduced according to strict protocol. Tom's part was simple: bow when introduced, say nothing unless directly addressed, and try not to break anything important. When the formalities ended, the real negotiations began. The Zephyrians wanted access to human art, music, and literature. They had studied humanity's creative works through their long-distance observations and found them fascinating. In return, they offered energy technology that could power Earth's cities for thousands of years. But the negotiations quickly became complicated. The High Council seemed determined to make the process as difficult as possible. Counselor Bren demanded that humans prove their worthiness by completing a series of trials. Another counselor insisted that Earth surrender control of its entire cultural output to Zephyrian oversight. Tom watched Queen Vera throughout these discussions. While her counselors made increasingly ridiculous demands, she said nothing, but he could see the tension in her posture, the way her fingers gripped the arms of her throne. Her crystal skin kept shifting to darker shades, which Tom had learned indicated stress. The worst moment came when Counselor Hex, a particularly hostile member of the council, suggested that humans were too primitive to understand the responsibilities that came with advanced technology. Perhaps, Hex said, his voice dripping with disdain, these creatures should return to their small world and continue playing with their simple machines. Tom felt anger flash through him. Earth had sent its best diplomats across the galaxy for this meeting, and this alien was treating them like children. He glanced at Ambassador Rodriguez, who was maintaining perfect diplomatic composure despite the insult. But it was Queen Vara's reaction that surprised Tom most. For just a moment, her controlled expression cracked, and he saw a flash of what looked like embarrassment and frustration. She was as fed up with her council's behavior as the humans were. The negotiations continued for hours with no progress. The High Council kept adding new conditions and obstacles. They wanted humans to prove their intelligence through tests. They demanded tribute payments. They suggested that Earth needed a period of observation before any agreements could be made. During a brief recess, Tom found himself standing near a window that looked out over the Crystal City. Queen Vara approached, moving with a grace that made her seem to float rather than walk. "I must apologize for my council," she said quietly. "They fear change, even when change might benefit our people." "Your Majesty," Tom replied, remembering to use the formal address. "We understand that these decisions are not made lightly." She was quiet for a moment, studying his face with those deep, sad eyes. "You speak our language well, Tom Chen of Earth. Better than my counselors expected." "Thank you, Your Majesty. I have always been good with languages." "It is more than that," she said. "You understand the emotional content behind our words. That is rare, even among our own people." Before Tom could respond, Counselor Bren called for the negotiations to resume. As they returned to their positions, Tom noticed something he had missed before. Queen Vara looked exhausted. The constant arguing and political maneuvering were clearly taking a toll on her. The afternoon session was even worse than the morning. The High Council seemed determined to make agreement impossible. They demanded that Earth provide detailed maps of every human settlement. They wanted lists of every piece of human technology. They even suggested that humans should send representatives to live permanently on Zephyria as cultural ambassadors, which sounded suspiciously like hostages to Tom. Through it all, Queen Vera remained silent. But Tom could see her growing frustration. Her crystal skin had turned to darker and darker shades of blue, and her hands were clenched so tightly that light seemed to spark between her fingers. Finally, Counselor Hex delivered what seemed like the final insult. "Perhaps," he said with a cruel smile, "these humans should prove their commitment by offering one of their number in marriage to demonstrate the bond between our peoples." The throne room fell silent. Tom could see the shock on his teammates' faces. Ambassador Rodriguez looked like he was about to explode with diplomatic outrage, but it was Queen Vara's reaction that caught Tom's attention. She had gone completely still, and her crystal skin had turned almost black with what Tom was beginning to recognize as deep emotional pain. In that moment, Tom understood. The marriage comment wasn't just an insult to humanity. It was a cruel reference to something Queen Vera was dealing with personally. He remembered Dr. Kim mentioning that Zephyrian rulers were expected to marry and produce heirs. The queen was under pressure from her own people to find a mate. The silence stretched on, becoming more uncomfortable with each passing second. Tom could see that Ambassador Rodriguez was struggling to find a diplomatic response to such an outrageous suggestion. That was when Tom's mouth got ahead of his brain. He had always been the type of person who used humor to defuse tense situations. It was a habit that had gotten him in trouble before, but it was also what made him good at reading people and understanding cultural nuances. Seeing Queen Vera's pain and the council's obvious cruelty, Something inside him snapped. "Well," Tom said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent throne room. "If your majesty is taking applications, I'm available." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. It was meant to be a joke, a way to break the tension and deflect the council's cruel suggestion. On Earth, it would have earned a few laughs and changed the subject. But this was not Earth. The silence that followed was so complete that Tom could hear his own heartbeat. Every Zephyrian in the room had gone statue still. Ambassador Rodriguez looked like he wanted to crawl under the nearest rock. Dr. Kim had covered her face with her hands. Tom felt his stomach drop as he realized what he had just done. In trying to make a joke, he had just made what could be interpreted as a formal marriage proposal to an alien queen in front of her entire court. He started, trying to backtrack. But Queen Vara was already rising from her throne. She moved with fluid grace down the steps from her throne, her crystal skin beginning to shift from the dark blue of distress to something lighter. The High Council parted before her like waves, their faces showing shock and something that might have been horror. Queen Vara stopped directly in front of Tom. She was tall enough that he had to look up to meet her eyes. But when he did, he saw something there that took his breath away. It was not anger or offense. It was hope. She leaned down, bringing her face close to his ear. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet that only he could hear it. "I was hoping you would say that." Tom's brain stopped working entirely. He stared at her in complete shock as she straightened and turned to face her counsel. "The human Tom Chen has made a formal proposal," she announced, her voice carrying all the authority of her position. "According to the ancient laws of our people, I have the right to consider any proposal from a representative of a worthy civilization." The throne room erupted in chaos. The High Council began shouting in their musical language, their voices creating a discordant symphony of outrage. Ambassador Rodriguez looked like he was about to faint. The other humans were staring at Tom as if he had just declared war on the entire galaxy. But Queen Vara remained calm in the center of the storm. She raised one hand and the room fell silent as if she had cast a spell. "The proposal will be considered according to our traditions," she said. "Until a decision is made, our human guests will remain as honored visitors to our world." She turned back to Tom, and for just a moment, her formal mask slipped. He saw gratitude in her eyes and something else that made his heart race. "We will speak again soon, Tom Chen of Earth," she said. Then she was moving past him, her robes flowing like liquid starlight as she left the throne room. Tom stood frozen in place as the implications of what had just happened began to sink in. He had come to Zephyria as a diplomat, trying to secure a trade agreement. Somehow, in the space of a single sentence, he had become engaged to an alien queen. "Tom," Ambassador Rodriguez said, his voice very quiet and very controlled, "we need to talk." As his team surrounded him with expressions ranging from panic to disbelief, Tom caught sight of High Counselor Bren. The alien's crystal skin was shifting through what Tom was learning to recognize as colors of extreme agitation. "This changes everything," Bren said, his musical voice sharp with concern. "If the Queen accepts this proposal, it will trigger political consequences that none of you understand." Tom looked around the throne room, at the magnificent crystal architecture, and the alien counselors who were still staring at him with mixtures of shock and calculation. He thought about Queen Vara's whispered words and the hope he had seen in her eyes. Whatever he had started with his careless joke, there was no going back now. He was either about to become part of the greatest diplomatic success in human history, or he was about to cause an interstellar incident that would haunt both species for generations. As his team escorted him from the throne room, Tom could not shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn that no amount of diplomatic training could have prepared him for. The trade negotiations had become something entirely different, and somehow, he had become the center of it all. The crystal spires of Zephyria stretched toward the alien sky outside the palace windows, beautiful and strange and somehow welcoming. Whatever happened next, Tom knew that his simple life as a human diplomat was over. And despite everything, he found himself looking forward to speaking with Queen Vara again. Tom paced back and forth in the guest quarters that had been assigned to the human delegation. The rooms were beautiful, carved from the same living crystal as the rest of the palace, but he barely noticed the shimmering walls or the furniture that seemed to grow from the floor itself. His mind was racing with the events of the afternoon. "Tom, sit down." Ambassador Rodriguez said from his chair near the window. "You're making me dizzy." Dr. Kim looked up from her tablet where she had been frantically researching Zephyrian marriage customs. According to what I can find in our cultural database, Zephyrian marriage proposals are binding once accepted publicly. There's no backing out without serious diplomatic consequences. Great, Tom muttered, running his hands through his hair. So I accidentally got engaged to an alien queen and now I can't take it back without starting an interstellar war. It's not that simple, Rodriguez said, though his expression was grim. The political implications here are enormous. If you go through with this, you're not just marrying Queen Vera. You're becoming part of the Zephyrian royal family. Earth will have a direct connection to their government. And if I don't go through with it? Tom asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The Zephyrians will see it as a grave insult, Dr. Kim replied. Not just to the Queen, but to their entire culture. We can forget about any trade agreements or technological sharing. Tom slumped into a chair that molded itself to fit his body. How did a simple joke turn into this mess? Before anyone could answer, there was a soft chiming sound from the door. A moment later, Queen Vara entered the room, moving with that same floating grace Tom had noticed before. She was alone, which surprised him. On Earth, heads of state never traveled without security. Your Majesty, Rodriguez said, jumping to his feet and bowing. Tom and Dr. Kim quickly followed suit. Please sit, Vera said, her musical voice gentle. I wish to speak with Tom Chen privately if that is acceptable. Rodriguez looked like he wanted to object, but diplomatic protocol demanded he respect the Queen's wishes. He and Dr. Kim quickly gathered their things and left the room, leaving Tom alone with the most powerful being on the planet. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Without the formal setting of the throne room, Queen Vara seemed less intimidating and more like a person dealing with an impossible situation. I owe you an explanation, she said finally, settling into a chair across from him. And an apology. An apology? Tom asked, surprised. Your Majesty, I'm the one who created this mess with my big mouth. A sound like silver bells escaped from Vara's throat, and Tom realized she was laughing. It was the first truly joyful sound he had heard from any Zephyrian since arriving on their world. Your big mouth, as you call it, may have saved both of our peoples from a very difficult situation, she said. But I should explain why. She was quiet for a moment, her crystal skin shifting through shades of blue and silver as she gathered her thoughts. My council has been pressuring me to marry for months, she began. According to our laws, a ruler must produce an heir within 5 years of taking the throne, or they must abdicate in favor of a relative. My parents died 3 years ago, which means I have 2 years left. That's a lot of pressure, Tom said softly. The problem is that every suitable Zephyrian male wants to marry me for political power, not for any genuine connection, Vara continued. My council has presented me with dozens of candidates, all of them calculating in cold. I had begun to think I would have to choose the least objectionable option and resign myself to a loveless marriage. Tom began to understand why his joke had affected her so strongly. And then I accidentally offered an alternative. More than that, Vera said, her eyes meeting his. You offered it with humor and warmth, without any knowledge of what you might gain from it. In that moment, you were simply trying to help deflect an uncomfortable situation. She leaned forward, and Tom caught a hint of that copper and flower scent that seemed to be part of the planet's atmosphere. I have been studying human culture for years, she admitted. Your people fascinate me. You face impossible challenges with creativity and hope. You find ways to laugh even in the darkest situations. These are qualities my own people have forgotten in our pursuit of perfection and order. You've been studying us for years? Tom asked. Since I was young, I have watched your broadcasts and read your literature, Vera explained. I learned your languages and studied your history. Humans adapt and grow in ways that my people never could. That is why I wanted this meeting to succeed so badly. Tom felt a strange flutter in his chest. The idea that this beautiful, powerful alien had been learning about humanity with such genuine interest was both flattering and touching. But your council doesn't seem to share your enthusiasm for humans, he pointed out. Vera's expression darkened slightly. My council fears change above all else. They see humans as chaotic and unpredictable. What they don't understand is that chaos can be creative, and unpredictability can lead to innovation. She stood and moved to the window, looking out over her crystal city. For centuries, our people have lived the same way, following the same patterns, thinking the same thoughts. We have achieved great technological advancement, but we have lost something essential in the process. What's that? Tom asked, joining her at the window. Joy, she said simply. When was the last time you saw a Zephyrian laugh? When did you see one act spontaneously or express genuine emotion? We have become so focused on perfection that we have forgotten how to truly live. Tom thought about his own world, with all its chaos and conflict, but also its music and art and the way people could find reasons to celebrate even in difficult times. Is that why you want the trade agreement with Earth? He asked. To bring some of that back to your people? Yes, Vara said, turning to face him. And your proposal, accidental though it was, has given me an opportunity I never expected. How so? Zephyrian law allows rulers to marry representatives of worthy civilization, she explained. The law was written thousands of years ago when we had contact with other spacefaring species. It was intended to create diplomatic bonds and share knowledge between peoples. Tom felt his heart start beating faster. And humans qualify as a worthy civilization? Your people took your first steps into space less than a century ago, Vara said with what Tom was learning to recognize as admiration. In that time, you have achieved things that took us millennia to accomplish. You have overcome wars and diseases and natural disasters through cooperation and innovation. If that does not make you worthy, nothing does. She moved closer to him, and Tom caught his breath at the intensity in her strange, beautiful eyes. But I will not force you into this, she said firmly. If you wish to withdraw your proposal, I will find a way to do so without dishonoring either of our peoples. You came here as a diplomat, not as a potential husband. Tom looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since this whole situation had begun. Beneath the alien beauty and the royal authority, he saw someone who was just as trapped by circumstances as he was. Someone who was trying to do right by her people while fighting against the weight of tradition and expectation. What would happen if we went through with it? He asked. Politically, it would create an unprecedented bond between our species, Vara replied. A human as part of the Zephyrian royal family would have a voice in our government. It could pave the way for the kind of cooperation and exchange that both our peoples need. And personally? Tom asked, surprised by his own boldness. Vara's crystal skin shifted to warmer shades of blue and silver. I cannot promise love, Tom Chen. We barely know each other. But I can promise honesty, respect, and the chance to build something meaningful together. Tom felt a decision crystallizing in his mind. It was crazy, dangerous, and completely outside anything he had ever imagined for his life. But it was also an opportunity to help both their peoples in a way that traditional diplomacy never could. There's something I should tell you, he said. I'm not some important diplomat. I'm just a language specialist who got lucky enough to be included on this mission. I don't come from a powerful family or have political connections. I'm nobody special. Tom Chen, Vara said, and there was something in her voice that made him look up at her. You made me laugh for the first time in years. You offered yourself to help a stranger without thinking of what you might gain. You see people not just positions or power. If that is not special, then I do not understand the word. Before Tom could respond, there was another chiming sound from the door. This time it was High Counselor Bren, accompanied by several other members of the council. Their expressions ranged from worried to outright hostile. Your Majesty, Bren said with a formal bow, we must discuss this situation immediately. Of course, Vara replied, her voice taking on the cold formality Tom had heard in the throne room. What concerns you, Counselor? This human cannot possibly understand the responsibilities and complexities of joining the royal family, said Counselor Hex, the same alien who had made the cruel marriage comment earlier. He is from a primitive culture with no understanding of our ways. Tom felt anger flash through him, but before he could respond, Vara spoke. Counselor Hex, she said, her voice sharp enough to cut crystal. Tom Chen has demonstrated more understanding of our culture in one day than you have shown of his in months of preparation. Perhaps you should consider who is truly being primitive here. The rebuke sent ripples of shock through the group of counselors. Tom realized that this was probably the first time in years that Queen Vara had directly challenged her council. Your Majesty, Bren said carefully, we are simply concerned about the precedent this would set. Marriage between species is legal under our ancient laws, Vara interrupted. Laws that you helped me study when I took the throne, Counselor Bren. Or have you forgotten your own teachings? Tom watched the exchange with fascination. This was clearly about more than just his accidental proposal. It was a power struggle between a young queen trying to lead her people in a new direction and a council determined to maintain the status quo. The law exists. Yes, admitted another counselor, but it has never been invoked. The complications will be worked out, Vara said firmly, as they always are when people of good faith work together toward a common goal. She turned to Tom, and he saw a question in her eyes. This was his chance to back out, to return to his simple life as a diplomat and leave her to deal with her council and her marriage problems alone. Instead, he stepped forward and took her hand. Her skin felt warm and smooth, with a slight vibration like electricity running just beneath the surface. "Your Majesty," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "I formally request permission to court you according to Zephyrian custom, with the intention of marriage if we find ourselves compatible." The counselors erupted in shocked chatter, but Tom kept his eyes on Vera. Her crystal skin had shifted to the warmest, brightest shades he had seen yet, and her smile could have powered a small city. "Permission granted," she said. "Let the courting period begin." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of cultural lessons, formal ceremonies, and getting to know each other. Tom learned that Zephyrian courtship involved elaborate rituals designed to test compatibility and commitment. He had to learn traditional dances, memorize poetry in the Zephyrian language, and participate in ceremonies that celebrated the joining of two lives. But the real courtship happened in the quiet moments between the formal events. Long walks through the crystal gardens where Vara showed him plants that sang when the wind touched them. Conversations late into the night about their different worlds and the challenges their peoples faced. Shared meals where Tom introduced Vera to human foods and she taught him to appreciate Zephyrian cuisine that tasted like liquid starlight. Tom discovered that beneath her royal training, Vara had a quick wit and a curiosity about everything. She asked endless questions about human culture, from the practical to the philosophical. Why did humans create so many different forms of music? How did they manage to cooperate despite their differences? What made them willing to explore the unknown even when it was dangerous? In return, Tom learned about Zephyrian history and culture. Their people had once been explorers and innovators, but centuries of peace and prosperity had made them cautious and conservative. The High Council represented the old way of thinking, while Vara dreamed of a future where her people could rediscover their sense of adventure and wonder. "Your proposal gave me something I had never dared to hope for," she told him one evening as they watched the triple sunset from her private balcony, "a chance to choose my own path while still fulfilling my duties to my people." "I'm glad my big mouth finally did something useful," Tom replied, earning another of those silver bell laughs. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for the end of the courting period, assuming both parties agreed to proceed. As the date approached, Tom found himself less nervous about marrying an alien queen and more excited about the future they might build together. The High Council made several attempts to sabotage the process, creating additional requirements and tests that Tom had to pass. But each challenge only seemed to strengthen his resolve and demonstrate his commitment to both Vara and her people. The breakthrough came when Tom suggested a modification to the traditional wedding ceremony. Instead of the usual Zephyrian ritual that emphasized duty and obligation, he proposed incorporating human elements that celebrated joy and partnership. "What if we created something new?" he suggested during a planning meeting. "A ceremony that honors both our traditions while creating something that represents the future we want to build together." Vara's eyes lit up with excitement. "A fusion of cultures like our marriage itself." The wedding took place in the great crystal amphitheater at the heart of the capital city. Representatives from Earth had arrived for the ceremony, including Tom's parents, who were still struggling to understand how their son had ended up marrying an alien queen. The ceremony began with traditional Zephyrian elements, the exchange of crystal tokens that would bind their life forces together, the recitation of ancient vows that spoke of duty and honor. But then Tom introduced human traditions that had been adapted for the occasion. Instead of simply accepting their predetermined roles, Tom and Vera spoke personal vows they had written themselves. They exchanged rings made from earth gold and Zephyrian crystal, symbols of the bond between their worlds. And when the formal ceremony ended, Tom taught the assembled Zephyrians how to celebrate with music and dancing, the sight of dignified, alien nobles learning to clap along with human music and attempting basic dance steps was something Tom would remember for the rest of his life. Even some of the High Council members were caught up in the infectious joy of the celebration. But the most meaningful moment came when Queen Vara, now Queen Vara Chen according to the new hybrid naming tradition they had created, made her first speech as a married ruler. "Today marks not just the joining of two individuals," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the amphitheater, "but the beginning of a new era for our peoples. We stand at the threshold of unprecedented cooperation and growth. Together, humans and Zephyrians will explore new frontiers of science, art, and understanding." She turned to Tom, and he saw the same hope in her eyes that had been there during their first private conversation. "My husband has shown us that strength comes not from rigid tradition, but from the willingness to adapt and grow. That wisdom is found not in isolation, but in the courage to reach across the void and connect with others who share our dreams." The celebration continued long into the night, with humans and Zephyrians sharing stories, music, and laughter. Trade agreements were signed, cultural exchange programs were established, and plans were made for joint exploration missions to distant worlds. As Tom and Vera stood together on the palace balcony, watching their peoples celebrate below, he marveled at how far they had all come from that awkward moment in the throne room. "Do you think this is what you imagined when you made your joke?" Vara asked, leaning against his shoulder. Tom considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago, he had been a simple diplomat hoping to facilitate a trade agreement. Now he was married to an alien queen, helping to guide the relationship between two species and looking forward to a future full of possibilities he had never dreamed of. "Not even close," he admitted, "but I wouldn't change anything." Vera smiled, her crystal skin glowing with contentment. "Neither would I." In the months that followed, the marriage proved to be everything they had hoped and more. Tom's position as Queen Vara's husband gave him unique insights into both human and Zephyrian perspectives, making him an invaluable bridge between the two cultures. Vara's gradual introduction of human concepts like humor and flexibility helped her people rediscover their sense of joy and adventure. The High Council, faced with the obvious success of the Union, gradually accepted the changes. Some even admitted that the human influence had made their society stronger and more vibrant. Tom and Vara established the first joint human-Zephyrian research stations, where scientists from both species worked together to solve problems that neither could handle alone. They created cultural exchange programs that allowed young people from both worlds to learn about each other's ways of life, and they began planning ambitious exploration missions that would take both species to parts of the galaxy they had never seen before. What had started as a diplomatic joke had become the foundation for a partnership that would benefit both species for generations to come. And at the center of it all was a simple truth that Tom had stumbled upon accidentally. Sometimes the best solutions come not from careful planning, but from the willingness to take a chance and see where it leads. As he settled into his new life as an alien prince consort, Tom often thought about the moment when everything changed. One careless joke had transformed his life, Vera's life, and the future of two entire civilizations. He had learned that sometimes the most important words are the ones that come from the heart, without calculation or planning. And sometimes, when you offer yourself honestly to help another person, you end up finding exactly what you never knew you were looking for.